Hi, everyone. It is my great pleasure for the second session this afternoon to introduce Thomas Treutler. Thomas is a leading expert in education and learning technologies and their marketplaces. This is an area very much of my own interest as well. Education has been enormously affected by COVID-19. It is an area which also had been undergoing transformation. Thomas's view, and I think the view of many, is that COVID-19 has accelerated that transformation. So Thomas is going to look very closely at the technologies transforming education and assess what the future of the space looks like in his presentation, Finally Open for Business, Higher Education and Accelerated Transformation. Over to Thomas.
Thank you, Clive. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited being here at Contact Live, and we'll jump right into the topic. I think many of you are interested in the accelerated transformation that's actually coming with this pandemic, this current situation that we're all going through. And I'll take a closer look on how higher education specifically has been affected there and what I believe will happen in the future. So we'll talk about higher ed being open for business now and the opportunities that lie ahead of us in this accelerated transformation that we are going through currently. We'll talk a little bit about the structural problems that have been coming up in higher education over the last 20 years or so. Who's to blame? How can we solve this dilemma? And what's actually your next move? So what can each one of us do in this accelerated transformation, in this general change that we are going through? First of all, structural problems in higher education, you can basically summarize it in three major points: financial, academic, and delivery. Those are the three topics that you can read anywhere, whether it's about universities in the United States, in Pakistan, in Germany, in South America. Everyone talks about financial problems. Everyone talks about the change in academic programs and what's important there in this new form of teaching, and then the delivery finally. So we'll go into these in a little bit more detail without talking about solutions necessarily. But when we talk about financial, it's basically about the financing and the funding. So there's a major structural change going on there in many countries, and many universities have this high dependency on tuition fees. And now that many students are staying away from traditional universities, this is a major problem for these institutions, because they need cash inflow not only to maintain their operation, but they also want to change. They want to go into this transformation process, but they don't necessarily have the resources there, or are not expecting any resources soon there that come in additionally. Another problem is the huge amount of student debt that students have, not only in the United States. This is a major problem in many economies, being in South America, being it in Asia, that students are accumulating a huge burden, and that leads to financial problems in general. Privatization is discussed very often as being actually a problem rather than a solution, although I won't go into that, but I think the solution that I'll present at the end as a proposal might give some answer there. We have price pressure, not only through the global competition that we are experiencing as institutions of higher education in general, but also price pressure because of new models that are coming up, new instructional models, and some kind of asymmetric competition. Asymmetric competition where basically competitors are coming into the field of education in general and higher education specifically that have not been competitors before and that have never been on the radar for most institutions. On the academic side, many institutions and many educational systems in the world are relatively monolithic education systems. They are not very modular. They don't allow students to really go into different directions, where universities, institutions of higher education, actually focus on higher education. In many countries, the problem is that there's also some kind of technical education going into universities. So that leads to an increased competition. There are many universities depend on this kind of monolithic education system. Quality and standards, how to maintain them. There's a lot of discussion going on whether private institutions in general always hold the quality and standards that students and the society at large are expecting. There are societal expectations for universities, depending on which region you are living in and where you are studying. It might be that universities are perceived as institutions of higher education, whereas in other areas, it's maybe the only solution for some kind of education after you're leaving school. Poor infrastructure is a problem. Academic attrition, this is a problem that becomes increasingly important for institutions. And many people see the different quota systems. It's something that they either want to debate or where they're not really happy with one or the other kind of quota that is being managed in educational systems. And finally, the delivery. Many universities are encountering major problems because there are disruptive delivery models coming onto the market. It started with the massive open online courses where universities do have an opportunity to focus more on a certain area of expertise and on the other side, reach larger volumes of students. But we also observe something that I frame here as TaaS, which is Teacher as a Service. This is a modularization where new platforms are popping up, where individuals can actually be present as professors and teach there. So it's kind of a TaaS, a Teacher as a Service kind of modularization. The platform concept that's surprising many universities, although about 900 years ago, universities were actually started as platforms in general, or you would say maybe as unions for teachers, for professors. And then this turned into major platforms. But somehow these institutions of higher education now have a major problem in this transfer into a new changed platform model that depends on technology and it depends on creating ecosystems around teaching and learning. And then differentiation and focus. Basically, all the, let's say, 5,000 to 7,000 institutions of higher education in the US, for instance, all want to offer the same. You find that all universities have some kind of negotiation course, have some kind of strategy course, have some kind of XYZ course, and we don't see this differentiation and the focus that other industries are experiencing and have experienced over the last 20 years or so. And then a final point I want to mention here, although many people don't see it yet, is a trust issue. Trust issue not necessarily with the brand names and the institutions themselves, but because of the increased pressure, there's also an increased level of title fraud and certificate fraud that affects, on one hand, the institutions of higher education, but also the companies who are hiring students who allegedly have certificates from these institutions. And so there's an enormous amount of fraud going on, not only in the US, but worldwide. And this is a major problem that traditional institutions, are encountering right now and will increasingly encounter in the future. Now, the structural problems summarized here are basically that the traditional university has always been one place for new knowledge. So throughout history, universities were this place of wisdom and knowledge where people came together. This today is very rapidly replaced by online platforms like Coursera, like Emeritus, like Versa, etc. So those are these new places, these new ecosystems that are being created that are replacing, maybe not immediately, but in the foreseeable future will replace this one place for new knowledge paradigm that the universities held so far. On the other side, universities were always the meeting place for intellectuals. There you also have new online platforms. So the whole model of traditional universities is basically overthrown. Being it LinkedIn, being it other specialized platforms where people can meet and discuss, is also putting universities increasingly under pressure, solving challenging problems. Again, online platforms, you have places like Innocentive, like Opino, where you can post problems and individuals can actually help you resolve these problems that you have as a company or as an institution. Quality guarantee and trust are increasingly replaced by rankings, accreditation agencies, and what we are also doing at Certix through blockchain-based platforms that can actually protect the information, the academic and diploma information of the universities. Content creation, also always a big topic, but their universities are increasingly replaced by publishers and also individual teachers who are now going onto these platforms, taking their own content with them and offering their services there. Content creation on one side, and then also the diversity. Usually traditional universities were these places of diversity where different ideas could be discussed. Today, the internet in general is providing this kind of diversity, and students can actually, or people who want to learn, who want to acquire new capabilities, can actually go worldwide to universities in India, in China, in Japan, in Germany, in Norway, the United States, or South America, and can find a much greater diversity out there in the internet. So those are the structural problems. Now, who's to blame? That's always a great question. We're always asking this question, who is to blame? We're always looking for this one person or this one responsible who's to blame. Well, I think it's the wrong question. We should not think about who is to blame. It has been over the last 20 to 50 years or so, there has been a certain complacency in higher education. The model has really not been questioned until recently. And so the complacency, in many places, also the high levels of regulation and rigid systems that came up are, in my opinion, the three major reasons why universities today have these problems in adapting to this new market, to this new reality, if you don't want to call it market. So what can help against this? Well, first of all, universities could do a reality check. Where are we? What do we offer actually? And I'll go into this in a minute, and then want to open also the discussion to hear back from you what you're thinking about that. Regarding regulation, we should have brutal transparency there and accountability for institutions of higher education. And when we talk about rigid systems, what universities need and what these ecosystems need are agility and rapid experimentation. There is no one-size-fits-all solution right now, because we don't know what the world will look like tomorrow or in a year from now. And that's why it's so important to be agile and to do rapid experimentation. So how can we solve the dilemma? Again, no one-size-fits-all solution. We have to take a very close look at each institution and the context these institutions are working and acting within. Every institution, everyone who works within education has to do a reality check. What are we really good at? No one is good at everything. And I think what we'll see is that we'll see a certain focus on certain areas that each one of these offerings are good at, each one of these universities, publishers, etc., are good at, and then we will basically come together again. The concept of the university as being a place where universal knowledge is being shared is basically replaced today by platforms who are increasingly providing this universality in teaching and providing knowledge or developing new knowledge. Universities should, like 932 years ago in Bologna, at least that's the modern university that we know, become an integrator again. So universities have this great opportunity to create these ecosystems that really respond to the necessity in the market. They should again adapt the platform idea. This time, not in a physical place necessarily, or not only a physical place, but also taking into consideration the digital space and become platforms themselves. Institutions have to become radically transparent. This is what we as learners are looking for, having radical transparency. They have to build partnerships around best-in-class solutions. That is what sometimes seems to be difficult for institutions, because many universities think they have it all and they know it all. And so sometimes it's difficult to invite someone else in and admit that they can do something better, and then be a beacon of trust. This is what people are looking for, especially in times where we don't know what is fake, what is real. Universities and everyone who is acting within this ecosystem, in this educational ecosystem, should try to become these beacon of trust that people really can trust and go to if they want to learn something. Think like the top 10%. Understand what leaders in other industries also do differently. And this is something that institutions of higher education can actually adopt. Leaders invest more in innovation. So institutions, publishers should think about innovating, not only innovating in products, but innovating in delivery models, in innovating in the creation of these ecosystems that we talked about. That's why leaders don't just adopt technologies. Ecosystems have to be created where different players are coming together. Leaders scale technology innovation across the enterprise, and leaders also understand that their systems must be boundaryless, adaptable, and radically human. Again, we are talking here about educating people, and that's why it's fundamental that we are radically human. Now, act also like the top 10%, adapt technologies or frameworks that are already proven in other industries. Sometimes we say education is different. We can't do that. This will not work at the university level. We should not do that. Again, there are frameworks and technologies that already work in other industries. We should not blindly adopt them, but we should see how they can serve in higher education. Develop an ecosystem mindset. This is probably the most difficult part. Whether we are talking about publishers or about universities, everyone is trying to create an all-in-one solution. And whether it's a publisher who is trying to move into or getting closer to the customer or student by developing their own language center or by developing their own university, we do have to create ecosystems where we admit what we are not able to do, and we focus on the things that we are really good at. Recognize data as being both an asset and a liability. Sometimes tech companies today only want to sell that it's an asset, and yeah, you should do these things and you should do that thing. But also data can be a liability. So please keep this in mind, and we can maybe talk about this in the discussion afterwards. But really, keep in mind, data is also or can be a liability, and maintain trust through economies of scale using blockchain, for instance, or other technologies. There are many ways that you can use these new technologies, like blockchain, for instance, in order to create trust or to create, let's see, these relationships in these upcoming ecosystems that universities and or publishers can develop. So this is the summary of the presentation that I have here and that I wanted to share with you about my vision of what is happening in higher education right now and how this is actually not a problem from my perspective, but it's a huge opportunity. Universities, for instance, can focus or should focus on what they do best and what they have. Universities, for instance, have infrastructure, whereas publishers might have content or know how to deliver this content. Bringing different players together here in this ecosystem for education and not compete, let's say, publishers competing against universities, but getting together everyone in this ecosystem, bringing in smaller companies who are really innovative and agile and can do rapid experimentation with these new technologies. I think that is the key, and that can actually help turn this kind of accelerated transformation in a success story for many universities. Not everyone will survive. Many will stay behind. and try to maintain their current model and will try to maintain the traditional model that will not be able to respond to the necessity that we see today in the market, and that we see that students are and any kind of learner are actually asking for. So if you want to build ecosystems, feel free to get in touch. And I'm really interested in hearing also your opinions about what I talked about, what's happening in higher education and what is happening in your specific industry that you're working in, or the challenges that your specific company, for instance, is facing in this current situation. Well, and with this, I'm basically giving back to Clive here so that he can help us to moderate any kind of questions that might come up.
Thanks, Thomas. I think that was great. It's really interesting. I think, interestingly, we've already spoken a lot over the last day and a half about the whole research world being disrupted by technology. Clearly, universities have got a very important research element to what they do. That's one of the reasons they exist. And then you focus very much on the education side. So whichever way you look at it, and a university is a very interesting place to be at the moment. We have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Tommy Doyle would isn't there a fundamental value problem in higher ed? In the US particularly, it simply costs too much, and there are cheaper, more flexible, tailored solutions to learn, network, and get hired. I would echo that from a UK point of view. I think it's getting to that point here in the UK too. So what are your thoughts on that question?
Exactly. I completely agree with Tommy on that. This is, from my perspective, based on that we are repeating these different kind of services in all these institutions in higher education. Let's just do a reality check on that. How many universities are out there, whether in the UK or in the US or in other places? I'll just have a number in the US. I think that's between 5,000 and 7,000. How many of them are offering some kind of advanced degree, let's say an MBA, for instance? Probably all of them, definitely 90%. So we are basically repeating the same thing. Each university is hiring a professor for strategy, a professor for negotiation. And what are these professors doing? They're basically repeating what everyone else is doing. In other industries, what would happen, and this might be something that we will observe over the next few years or so, also in higher education. Let's just say we would have just 30 professors or 50 professors in Europe that work on strategy and that are focused. They are really focused on strategy. They have their research group work on that, and they create content together with publishers, for instance. And then this content could basically used as shared content over different platforms. And then there would be a platform in Spain, for instance, and this kind of content would be reutilized, but you would not need a specific professor at this university who is creating the content, who is delivering the content, but you could create larger platforms. And so the opportunity here is specifically on the platform side. So universities could become these platforms, and they could also create this space where students can come together, because we still want to meet. We still want to have this kind of social interactions. For certain professors, it would be good to create this kind of content together with publishers, for instance, or companies specialized in best showing or transferring this kind of knowledge and experience to students. And then you could bring these different players together. At the end, we will probably not see that there are still 5,000 universities out there with 5,000 strategy professors. I would be very surprised if we still see this in 20 years from now. I do believe that we will see some kind of reshuffling in the market.
But does that mean you'll see some universities just disappear, just go out of business, as it were? Or
I would assume that many universities will disappear the way they exist today, because they are not necessarily adding value. They are not better than other universities or other offerings that are basically cheaper and or are more able or more easily able to convey knowledge and to create new knowledge. But still, this does not have to happen. Universities have important assets there. They have people. Supposedly, they are on the forefront of new knowledge and always say we are creating new opportunities. So there is a big opportunity, and they have space. They have space where people can come together. Again, I do not believe that we will have fully virtual places all over the place. We will have some, yes, but we will have in the majority. For instance, if I think about myself, I would like to take, let's say, 50 or 60% of a course here at home from my computer, working with the best that are out there. And then I would also like to go to a place where I can meet people, like-minded people, who are maybe in the same course and who I can work with on solving problems, on going through these classes. So I see, let's just say it could be something like we work, but we learn. So take a look if you can reserve this brand name or if WeWork already has that name. But universities can become these we learn places where they bring together all this knowledge from all over the world.
I'm fascinated by the argument. I mean, you mentioned the University of Bologna. There's that famous painting from 600-700 years ago of the lecture theatre, which actually, I've got a daughter, first year Leeds University. You know, I could probably take a picture which is pretty much the same. So I've got a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure.
One that I echo as well. Interested in your statement between data and reliability. Can you expand on how data is a liability? What is your view there?
Well, if you are in Europe, at least on the continental European side, you know what I mean. I mean, if you don't manage your data correctly in the appropriate way, data can very easily become a liability. Just by people suing you because you have not used their data appropriately. I mean, these days in Europe, in Germany, for instance, where I'm from, the way data is being managed is very different from how it is being managed in the US, in China, and in other places. So their data can become a liability. You have to be very careful. You cannot measure it or work with it the same way all over the world. You have to really differentiate there. And then also,
Go on.
And then the other thing is, yes, it can also become a liability if you interpret it in the wrong way. Sometimes people believe blindly in data and don't necessarily consider it within the context. And there are opportunities for mistakes.
Yeah, I accept that. I think people data in particular is very sensitive. I mean, even us moving from a face-to-face environment into an online platform as we have this event, we are much more restricted in many respects on what we can do with the personal data. That's not really a bad thing in many respects. It's a respectful thing and an appropriate thing, but it is just a sign that things are changing. Tommy Doyle wants to come back with ecosystem thinking is very powerful. Yes, I'm sure I would agree with him on that too. But the current leadership in these industries are very much of the paywall, own the full stack. So how do they change? What do they need to do to change? Great question.
Well, that's a tough one. In many industries, you would say change the people and you change the thinking. But I mean, obviously, that's a very radical approach. I think it would be very difficult, for instance, for established university to change their structure within the time frame that they have available. One model that you might use there, if you are, for instance, with an established institution, is you create a mirror institution. So you basically create a new legal entity that can respond to the same, let's say, supervising council or to the same group of people, but you would have a different legal entity, and then you would give this legal entity more like a startup status, not within the same university. It should be allowed to use certain assets within the university, but basically give them freedom to move. major problem that I've observed in many universities is people who develop certain processes are obviously in love with their own processes and think those are the best in the world. And for many people, it's very difficult to understand that what students are actually looking for is something very different. It's a very different experience. And so I would say you need a new structure, you need a new kind of thinking. And if you just change a few people and create, let's say, a department for digital transformation or for accelerated transformation, you will most likely frustrate both sides. The traditional side that wants to preserve it, and the new side that comes in that maybe works very well for the first 6 or 12 months, and then they're basically powered out and go elsewhere because they see that nothing is moving, not even closely to the speed that they would like to move at. So I would create a different entity there, give them a different kind of status, and then let them just run.
I think it's difficult to ghettoize something like that as well, because people will just say, tick the box, they do that, we don't have to think about it. And clearly there's some fundamental cultural change. Anyway, I'm sure we could talk for a long time. Fabulous session, Thomas, terrific. The future of universities has got a real bearing on many of our audience. We've got some very senior university librarians in the audience. I'd be very interested to know what they think about this discussion and how they would react. Anyway, thank you once again for sharing your fantastic presentation and thoughts. It's my pleasure to now say we have another networking section. We've got a 30-minute break. Time to get a coffee and or a tea, have a stretch. But please do join in the networking on the platform. You actually get to see people. You can chat up to 6 people in twos. Give it a real go, because I think we're learning with this, and it's getting better all the time. So do please have that experience. And also just to point out that anything that you missed from day one is now fully available in the schedule. Just click on the link and you can watch it all again. We'll be back in half an hour. Thank you, Thomas. Enjoy the networking break, and we'll see you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Thanks, Clive. Everyone, have a good day.